Welcome everyone to Deeper Dive, an interview series dedicated to sharing some of EVE Online's most engaging and complex gameplay with a wider audience. Your host for this journey will be Alexei of Card, and
Hello.
myself, Murray Rothbardo, as we talk with guests that are some of the premier subject matter experts in their respective areas. Today, we're going to be talking about the competition that occurs over a specific site in the Pochven region of space, Observatory Flashpoints. These are some of the most lucrative sites that can be done in the game, and they are highly rewarding as an activity, encouraging group organization and combat over individual effort, which is something rarely seen in money-making activities in EVE Online. We've got two guests here right now. One of them is Outlawed NoPro, and our other is Elizabeth Wong. So we're going to do some introductions real quick. We'll start with Elizabeth Wong. Just give us a little bit about who you are, what you do in Pochven, and kind of what brought you to the region in the first place.
So my name is Elizabeth Wong. I'm like one of the directors of Straybock Clade. I joined Pochven like a year and a half ago with Goon Swarm, like low sec incursion running group called Crab Swarm. We kind of tested sites on CC and decided to like switch from incursions to Pochven sites, and this is how I end up here. And year and a half later, I'm still here.
Nice, nice. And what about yourself, NoPro?
That's a good question. Actually, I had to think about that for a second. I think the first time I actually got into Pochven was through a friend of mine that is currently in congregation called Deadly Deadly. The first start was when the region was still standings locked, and we were just kind of trying to figure out how stuff works, and started to make good money, and went onwards from there. Had some fun, and never really got tired of it until recently.
What happened recently?
Well, I mean the broad definition, or the broad, how do you say it? My TLDR is just Marauder spam because it's not interesting gameplay for me.
Yeah. Could you give folks a little bit of context about who you are in game, who you fly with, stuff like that?
Personally, I'm currently with We from Volta, and I have been ever since basically as I came to Pochven, I was in there as well. I have, after getting into Pochven, I have started my own kind of Pochven group that I have formed fleets with and fought other people with, and yeah, I'm still there, still enjoying my time in Volta.
And planning around them. So, kind of from the very basic start, I want to talk a little bit about the geography of Pochven. Obviously, it is kind of its own region that got yoinked out of the main map. But Elizabeth, if you could describe a little bit about the geography of Pochven and maybe some of the basics about getting in and out of the area.
Okay. I don't know how to get in because I never leave. But like obviously it's 27 systems and 3 of them homes connected like gate to gate basically, which makes it very easy to travel around, and obviously it's very easy to like a hunting fleet or like a dunking fleet to just filament in from G10 and start hunting obviously.
Yes.
What drew you to Pochven initially?
So when I started the game, and it was like maybe my second month of playing the game, so obviously I just needed money and stuff, and we were running low sec incursions in like Gilas and bases, and it was like obviously shit because you would slap some Netflix and just forget about anything for like an hour, and you get like 500 mil in the end, right? Which is obviously not very good, but it was enough for the time being. And then some people tested these sites after they heard that Sigulin apparently like getting fixed in like a few weeks, and people tested the sites, um, tested the setup. Obviously, our first doctrine was like Praxis with Basis. It was like Torpedo first at the step, and we realized that site is pretty good and decided to deploy it. So we came, and I think Scotty and Matt from Strybocklade show us how to run like our first few sites. And like obviously there was some Sigurinn and stuff, but I decided to give it a try. And like first week was a blast. We had like two different leads basically. So one would like run a flashpoint, and one was to protect the gate from seagulls and stuff. And like both fleets were kind of pretty chill, right? Because in the main fleet you obviously get all the money, but in the second fleet you kind of get all like small scale PvP, right? Because you would sit in the first room and someone would warp in and you need to kill them, right?
So, Wong mentioned kind of living in Pochven, not needing to go in and out. NoPro, I know your group and the way you set up, you guys actually staged outside of Pochven, which is something that even, talking to some other guests I do in AUTZ, we all lived in Pochven, so our experience is very different. But talk to me a little bit about kind of how you would move in and out of Pochven, in regards to wormholes, filamenting, and how you'd make use of that as you went to run these sites in Pochven.
Actually, when I first started, as I just mentioned, when we were like in the beginning of Pochven for myself, we did actually stage out of Kuhara. Some of the, I think it was RC at the time who had the Athenors, or no, Fortizai even, that we staged out of. And only after the gates were unlocked, we started staging out of Jita for easier resupplying of ammo, cap boosters, and new ships, obviously. And I made that decision because of the filaments being, us being able to use those for very easy and quick access to Pochven, and only a minor increase in travel time for two fleets catching up, for example. As compared to us being in a staging system and then a flashpoint spawns on the other side of Pochven, and we would have to travel there all the way, which I saw as a bigger annoyance, let's just say. And I think that decision was the best after all, at least from my experience. So yeah.
It's also like pretty easy to kill people from outside because you can scout for sites and then just wait for someone to get in the site, and then you take the filament and just filament on top of them, which
True.
makes this way much better because we, for example, we need to undock from staging, and obviously ice will be on the station, and you're gonna get spotted immediately. Comp gonna get spotted, and obviously people who engage you after you undock will have an advantage because we're gonna see the comp, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So there are two other things I want to touch on in terms of the Pochven overall. One is the system effect. So if one of you would like to go over kind of what the basics of what it does and how it impacts, deciding which ships to bring into Pochven.
I mean, as Elizabeth,
remember.
if you want to go ahead, since you're the one living in Pochven.
I don't even remember what the effect is.
Yeah, I was
I
trying
know
to
it
avoid
has
that as well.
something. I know it has something to do with like reps
There's
applying
an-
better.
there's I know that there's stats for increased remote reps, fewer locked targets, less warp speed, and I think that's about all actually, right?
Yeah, so it's the 10% increase in reps, and then the reduced lock targets by half, and warp speed down by 30%.
The warp speed going down is an interesting one. kind of just makes the whole region more difficult to travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What practical effect do you think that has on the PvP meta?
At the battleship, you fucking very slow.
Yeah, the
And
obvious of if you like using Stry, for example, if they stage out of, I don't know, one side of Pochven and they need to travel to the other side to join the fight or whatever, they take a long time to get there. And even in a system itself, if it's one of the bigger systems with like, I don't know, 50, 60 EU warps, and one of your guys gets tackled on the gate while you're warping those 60 EU in battleships, then you
Yep.
can almost always just consider him dead.
Yep. And the funniest thing is like when like non-experienced group, like that's funny about like frat or horde, right? Because they have like a lot of people coming in and out. So fleet usually doesn't have like a dedicated people who do different like important roles, like a hyena, for example. And it's pretty funny when you undock like 60, 50 billion fleet, right? And it falls to like 90 million destroyer, right? You're just gonna get bubbled on each gate. Even if you're gonna bring a hyena, you're gonna get bubbled ahead. So it's like, it's just suffering, right? If you do it right. That's why it's pretty funny. Like Frat never counter waterboarding, and it's like, mate, you can make your day pretty bad. And with a warp speed bonus, you can make piece so people like do 1 OF in an hour, while you can run everything else, right? Which is kind of toxic.
One thing that, especially as someone who likes to, think about different comps and theoretical strategies or whatever, that always worried me when I'm looking at the system effect is the locked targets and the traditional logistics choices that a lot of people think about, right? The most standard T2 logistics, right? The Bazzi and the Guardian. Now, usually they want to be cap chaining, which means they need to have people locked to do the cap chain. And then they need to try and lock people to rep them, but they only have 3 locked targets as base in Pochven. So, have you avoided using those ships? Have you tried to work around that difficulty, or how does that impact those ships if you do use them?
So when we started, right, so there was the group was completely like no experience at all, and like um, fights and whatever, right? It was just low sec crabs, and low sec doesn't do a lot of damage. So in the for the first few times in the site, since you can't lock a lot of targets, and bases would cap chain. So there was like a rule where like in a site the cap chain was 2 down, and in PvP you would spread cap chain like 1 up, 1 down. So if one gets neutered out, it kind of doesn't have the same effect, right? And with 2 targets, obviously locked for capacitor transfer, it's impossible for like most of the new people to do anything. So the ships were dying pretty quick, like to the dread and shit, which was pretty annoying.
Yeah, personally, I have to think. I think at the start, we exclusively used Lashaks and Nesters to avoid the problem of, cap chaining and having to adjust targets very often. But when I focused more on PvP myself, I did introduce Guardians as both a means to have a cap transfer, which is incredibly useful considering the high amount of energy warfare. But it is a problem in that sense that the people and pilots need to pay a lot of attention to what they're repping, which targets they have locked. Because the Guardian, I think, only has 4 locked targets, if I remember correctly. Might even be 3, I can't remember. But you'd essentially be limited to only 1 cap chain. If that gets jammed, you'll be in a lot of trouble. So it was a bit RNG based, a bit skill based, but I think it certainly increased the how do you call it? Maybe the fun factor of it, or like the well, the fights being more engaging for the pilots themselves.
The only other thing in terms of basics then that leaves to talk about is the Pochven rats themselves, which they do not act like normal rats in pretty much any other area of the game. They don't act like mission rats, they don't act like rats in like nullsec or standard gate rats. And obviously, although we're talking mostly about the fighting of people, these rats are in the site, and in Pochven they can also be outside the site and on the gates and on the wormholes and pretty much anywhere else that you might end up and there could be a fight. So
And they're serious business damage, right?
yeah, they're not a joke. I mean, Wong, you are the resident. Talk to us a little bit about, some of the different rats and what kind of problems they can pose when you're out trying to fight people or you're out trying to run these sites.
So one problem will be obviously like Edencom rats on gates, because when you run flashpoints a lot, unless you're doing standing stunting, you obviously will be red to Edencom. So when gating, sometimes there is a blob of rats on the gate, and most of the time you're gonna cold warp and we're not gonna scrum you, right? But sometimes you're gonna cold warp and a small raptor or a small claw gonna just grab it. So it depends, like kind of now come naturally because you know which rat always gonna scrum. For example, Lachesis, right? Because it's always have range, and the raptor or a claw or like small other small rats may not gonna scrum you that often, right? So it's you kind of can go by feel. And the second thing is obviously the drifters, the drifter battleship, which mostly like dangerous on the site itself. So for example, it's gonna be Triggs fighting, Eden fighting, and if there is a wormhole in the system, right, drifter hole, the drifter is gonna warp in the site, and it doesn't matter anymore, except you like running if you run in Ishtars or like other like cruiser comps, because after the battleship buff, like battleships are completely busted, right? So the drifter's not gonna even do enough damage. Obviously, if you're gonna get DD, right, it's goodbye. You're not gonna tank a battleship DD, but if you have a pod and a like normal feet, you're gonna tank, for example, a cruiser DD, right? But before the battleship buff, you could land on grid and it would be like a spicy side with like Tyrannos Navarcos, Tyrannos Agrios Tyrannos, and they would hit pretty hard. So sometimes entering the sites with these rats on grid would give some challenge, but not anymore, obviously.
All right.
Another question on the NPCs. To what extent do they interact with each other?
So Triggs would shoot Edencom, and Drifters will shoot everyone. I think that's kind of it.
Do they regularly like are you commonly running into just big pitched NPC battles as you roll around?
Yeah. So when sites spawn, like on the site before the gate open, two groups gonna fight each other. It's Edencom and Triggs. You need to kill Edencom to make the gate open. You usually need to only kill like rats from the first wave. And once most of them dead, like a big ones, up to cruisers, the gate usually will open and everyone will warp off. But yeah, they fight pretty regularly.
What happens
like
if you shoot the Trigs?
Yeah, they're just gonna attack you. Sometimes they attack for no reason. It's like one of the bugged things. For example, if there is like drifters on grid, Triggs on grid, and Edenholm on grid, and you, for example, shoot the same targets that Triggs were shooting, or you shoot drifters, sometimes it's gonna aggro you, even if you have positive Triggs tendons. Not sure how it works. Sometimes it's gonna also aggro on drones. For example, some people gonna drop drones in the first room, and Triggs gonna aggro. Like this, I think maybe works because drones have no standings, and it's tries to attack drones, and then since the drones it's your drones, it attacks you. I don't know how it's like coded, but it's like the only explanation what was found throughout the years. But
one of the
Yeah,
classics in terms of trig shooting people is, especially when a newer group will start running sites in Pochven, if they have somebody who doesn't have standings with the Triglavians, that usually isn't a big issue, except for the fact that the last wave in the Observatory Flashpoint includes an allied Zernitra. And if that thing decides to start shooting, it will kill people. It is not a joke.
yeah.
And once people
about to-
accidentally start repping the thing it's shooting, it decides everyone is a threat. And it just can wipe, an entire fleet before they realize what's going on.
Yeah, I was about to mention that actually. The fucking how would you call it? The anti-Triglavian curse being spread amongst your fleet, and the Zernitra finally has a gun that does capital damage equal to a capital class gun or anti-cap gun, however you want to call it. But it has the tracking of a medium railgun roughly, which means that it's a lot of DPS applied to even the smallest ships in a very short amount of time. So
yeah,
it's definitely possible to tank it, but for example, if you have a Guardian in fleet that simply doesn't get a high buffer overall, it's it'll just explode by a single shot most of the time.
yeah. I think now it's like after we buff resist too, right? So it's like not really an issue. But before, obviously the group was like mostly goons, right? And people were just piling in every single day, new people. And some guy would join, say, I have standings, right? And then we go inside the site and he doesn't have standings, right? And Zorn would wipe like not half of the fleet, but 2 bases and a praxis would like disappear pretty quickly, right? So you just warp off.
I think
Don't worry, that doesn't only happen with goons. I've had
Yep.
fun experiences too.
The funny thing you can do, like with drifters, for example, that's like not a common thing. Obviously, it's like it doesn't work right now after a battleship buff, but before you can wait for example, for a fleet to land on a flashpoint, and then like lock up a dictor or something like 100 off close to a drifter, like a battleship drifter or cruiser drifter that has a strike weapon, and then you just decloak, start orbiting, and you remove the overshield, and it's gonna DD something, right? So it's gonna DD like Nestor, Guardian, and it's a medial blap, right? And it's pretty like small little cheese you can do. Because overshield dies pretty quickly, even if with like a dictator.
Yeah, and for some people, you don't even need to do that, and they shoot the battleship themselves, and then wonder, where did our
Yep.
Nestor go? I won't say that happened to me, but it might have.
fun fact for
Yeah.
people visiting Pochven for the first time, you can check whether a drifter has a doomsday weapon by opening its description, and it will just tell you. Which is a little weird, but
Yep.
I'm not complaining because it's definitely saved some people in my fleet from death from time to time.
You can just remember two, right? Orpheus and Agrios. These that don't have a DD, and everyone else will.
So we ended up talking a little bit about the flashpoints themselves there with the Zernitra and some of the other mechanics of rats. So I want to talk very directly about those sites. And so we've mentioned already that there's an inside and an outside. So it's a dead space site where there's an outside that you warp into. It has a gate you activate, takes you into the site itself. And then inside the site, you have two smaller rat waves, a bigger wave with the dreadnought, dreadnought being an enemy dreadnought, it's an Amar Revelation. Then once the dreadnought is destroyed, there's a tower in the middle that becomes targetable, and you have to blow that up with help from the allied Zernitra and a couple of bonus damage pylons in the site. Now, when we're talking about fighting over these sites, are we looking at fighting mostly on the outside or the inside? And what are the differences in those two areas in terms of how you need to approach the fight? And we'll start with NoPro.
I think generally you can say that most people will want to fight the fight inside the site because there are very nice little things that spawn after you kill the Edencom Dreadnought Revelation that give you double the damage that you can just sit on. And since it's a gated site, people will warp into a set location. And the increased damage beacon is roughly 20 kilometers away from it. So most ships that have an optimal range of like 10 to 20 km will very much benefit from that. But obviously, after that became more commonly known that existed, people started paying more attention to it and tried to avoid fighting inside, which then took the fights outside by either locking the gate with a bubble, since it's an acceleration gate. You need to warp inside the site, and the bubble obviously cancels the warp. So I think currently it's probably 50-50, but at the start it was definitely aimed to the fight was optimally fought inside the site.
I remember a very funny video to watch of a fight between Goran Clade and Horde, where Goran was set up on the damage beacon, and Horde came in. They clearly didn't know what it did or anything about it, because they just continued to orbit the enemy fleet at like 20 kilometers the whole time and kept dying.
Yeah, I think we knew what it did, but no one told them that you can kill it, right? So we thought it's an indestructible structure. I remember this one. It was like just like a Nestor and Paladin feed.
I also remember when we first tried to tell some other people in the Alliance about the beacon. The only way you can do it is by broadcast target. And so we broadcast it to be like, go stand there. And somebody killed it. We were like, wait a minute. No.
Yep.
That's
Yep,
not what you're supposed to do.
And since everyone like approached the beacon, and you will see like fleet inside the site fly in random direction, absolutely.
Yeah.
And someone definitely killed it.
The way that I actually found out about them being destructible is when we were in a similar situation as the one with Gordon and Horde you just described, where we were set up inside and Horde gated a massive Tempest fleet inside. And at some point, their support wing of Tier 1 MOAs were just sitting at 0 on us with a lot of drones as well. So I decided to call for smart bombs. And smart bombs obviously damaged the beacon. And at some point, I noticed the little symbol that told you had more damage go missing. And from that moment, I was like, oh, seems like you can actually destroy it. And yeah, we made use of that afterwards. Had some good fun with it.
But like this, so because this site has like basically two rooms split with this gate, there was like also this vector, right? It has its own meta. It had, or like have. So at the start, people obviously just take it, right? So it doesn't matter how strong your fleet is. If you get in split in half, you're dead, right? So there was like some, you can align down the gate, right? And take immediately with what can go through and what cannot, right? But at some point, I remember like everything kind of changed. It was like some Russian fleet. Don't remember if it was locally or someone else, but I clearly remember it was Russian fleet. We did the first like a bush trick, right? When you have a busher on you, when everyone take the gate, and it doesn't matter if someone else bubbles you, right? Instead of like half going in, you're just gonna bush off, kind of thing, right? Bush to safety, and then you can warp off. and this like changed meta entirely because people stopped like if you don't bring a busher in the first room, you just ask him to get basically bubbled and killed in the first room.
Yeah, I think you are actually right. I believe it was Lockley that we saw do it as well, and then gone off of that ever since.
Because now like if people actually know what to do, it's pretty hard to get split. Because like I mean, Horde doesn't do it. I saw Frat do it once. So for example, the best thing you can do is everyone gonna approach FC or whatever who is anchor is. You're gonna pull you off the acceleration gate a bit, so no one takes it immediately. Because if you orbiting, your orbit can match the vector of the gate, and you're gonna like insta warp inside. So to avoid that, you just approach. And once someone starts bushing, the hick obviously locks the busher. And if something declocks, he gonna scram the busher and put the bubble up. And this way, no one takes the gate and no one gets bushed like 100 off. Then you kill a dictor and do it again. And once the dictors are gone, you just take it, right?
Yeah, and so it seems like it's less about getting into the site guaranteed and more so about just keeping everybody together. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Yeah, if you get split at like any moment, right? Like you can get split while warping to the site, right? For example, someone declocks and bubble half on the gate and warp on the gate and you. I mean, obviously, you're not tanking with half of a fleet, right? It depends what you have, right, and what gets split. But usually, if you get split inside the site, and there is like now, it kind of doesn't matter because there is not a lot of battleships. For with fish stars, like you're gonna warp inside and you just warp off because they don't have any tackle, right? But before it was just death, right? So if you took the gate early, if you got split on the gate and fleet lands in the first room, because the problem is, right, the Crusaders gonna spawn in this second room, and if you don't clear them quick enough, the fleet gonna die before you rewarp, right? Because you need to rewarp to close the string and then back in, which they're probably gonna die. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've lived in Pochven for a pretty long time at this point as well. So I'm not the best read on this, but Alec, are there any other things about the sites that you've ever been curious about in terms of their mechanics?
I've always been a little bit curious about the mixture. Like, is it similar to an incursion fleet if you were to run this ideally, in terms of sort of glass cannony long range ships supported by a handful of logi?
Mm. So before, right, there was like a crab setup, right? Like this praxis with cruise missiles, basically anything with cruise missiles when you don't need to move. And like it's so you can run sites differently, right? If you are brawling com, you're gonna usually smart bomb the first two waves, then burn to the dread, kill it, then burn to the pylon and kill the tower, right? But you can obviously run some different comps that gonna do the range thing. For example, the Vargor guy, he will finish the site the fastest because he's gonna use the RT Vargors, right? He doesn't need to move. He just sit there, bastion down, kills the ref, kills the tower, and he's gone, right? It depends like what's the goal is, right?
We'll say I wanted to, I don't know, I had like 10 billion ISK and I wanted to put together, I don't know, like 10, 15 people to be competitive running sites, not just against the NPCs, but against other players I may run into. What am I looking to bring?
Paladin Nestor Blob.
Master Bob? Okay.
I don't
Yeah.
think that fits the 10 billion budget quite well.
Yeah,
I
it
mean-
doesn't fit the 10 billion. Yeah, per ship. I thought it per ship.
Oh no, in that case, oh well, you could have a lot of
Yeah,
fun
I
with that, I'm
think-
sure.
Especially, I've seen some conversations with NoPro or seen some Death Sass Strybog where it's some eye-popping numbers on single ships there for sure. But I
Oh,
think
yeah.
So
so.
if you have
One of the things I think comes from that question, though, is when you're looking at running the site, or like the basic things you need to run the site, right? Obviously, you have a lot of concerns for your fleet about its PvP capabilities in terms of being able to fight other people. But like, what are the main things you need to make sure your fleet does in terms of being able to deal with the rats quickly, and then deal with the revelation and the tower quickly?
I think there's two ways to approach that, which is either because the revelation behaves like a quote unquote normal revelation might as well. So essentially, it'll be 5 minutes of it being not in siege, and then after that, it goes into siege. So one option could be that you would design a doctrine that kills the revelation before it goes into siege, so that you can avoid most of the critical damage. The other is quite simply run away from it so it can't hit you. Um, first one, um, first doctrine that I mentioned, as I said, anything that does a lot of DPS. Second one would basically be anything drone based, because once you actually engage the drones on the dread, you can run as far as 500 kilometers and be out of the damage range of the rev. And since it's in siege, it's stuck in place and won't warp to you or anything. So you basically just need to wait until the site is completed.
there is like a third one. It's was like a meta for a while, like when Horde didn't. It was like a Vedmak fleet, and obviously normal people would run an Ikitursa. So you can orbit the ref, just orbit at 500. Usually anchor up on FC, and he orbits 500, so you don't bump, but the ref can track you close, so it doesn't do any damage at all. It doesn't matter like siege or not. It won't do any damage. So it was a meta for a while, basically, just like 9 Ved max, orbiting dread with. I think Horde did like a double prop at the start, so we would switch to AB to like make sig even lower. But I think if you just orbit without the prop, it like had very low chance of hitting you.
I mean, we did the same with Ikitursas and the tracking disruptors, but the
Yeah.
issue why we stopped doing that at some point is the dread still has a very low, but there is still a chance that
Yep.
the dread might wrecking shot you, which means that 99% of the time you're just dead either way. Especially if you're in cruisers um, to utilize the low sig. Most of the time, it means that every, let's say, third or fourth site, you just lose one ship guaranteed. So at some point, we just, I mean, if you do it with Vedmax, for example, the ship is already paid off after one site, so it's not a big issue. But Ikitursas, for example, are not really properly sustainable if you lose a ship so often.
That is a very good transition to what many people would argue is the most important part of the site, the payout itself. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now the main obvious things are it has a very weird scaling, but it scales up to 15 people, and then the more people you bring after 15, the lower the payout overall goes. So not only does each person get less, but the overall total becomes less. But how important is that in terms of keeping in mind like how you build your fleet, right? Because it's something that's very unique to that area of space. In other sites or like things in nullsec lowsec, you either just want to do it yourself so you get all the money, or it doesn't really matter how many people you bring. But this restriction is very unique outside of, except I guess, incursions in terms of how it's set up.
Yeah, it's like an ideal world. Like everyone would have a 15-man fleet, right?
Well, what happens in the
Yeah.
actual world?
I mean, before blocks came, it was like this, right? People would run like a smaller comps, but now it's like you can don't think you can contest the block with like 15 people.
I think it depends, because at the start the blocks were mainly running cheap-ish stuff,
Yeah.
or rather lower class stuff than you were saying, or like considering that most of the quote-unquote advanced fleets were in Leshaks, sometimes one or two Marauders added to the mix, or generally just faction battleships, whereas Horde were, I think at the start, mainly using Typhoons, Tempest.
Yep.
Goons started in Praxis, for example. Don't remember what they went on after that, but the point is that you were able to fight them off, considering that you had a stronger doctrine overall, and you could counteract their numbers advantage with maybe not skill, but a little bit of bling and higher damage, higher resistances, all of that. And at the moment, it is most of the blocks switched to those more expensive doctrines as well. However, they still bring higher numbers than you have most of the time, meaning that there is significantly lower outplayability, let's call it.
So basically, the meta is like right now, the block meta, if you want to undock and run a side, you need one fleet that will be like the strongest, and a second fleet that's gonna like run sides like not close to you, but like maybe on the opposite side to you. But if something comes to you, this fleet gonna come and reinforce this one. That's what Frat do. Because like, for example, they have a paladin fleet out, and I'm out with like yell, and they never gonna engage us, right? But once the site spawns a bit closer to them, they're gonna bring the paladin fleet, and they're gonna start gating the Bargis fleet, right, from Navula to bait us in the fight. And this you can only counter by bringing another fleet on top of your, right? So it's kind of aids a bit, because it's basically just like who gets the sites first and have a support fleet out, sadly.
And so,
And it kind of derailed from the payout.
Well,
so it's interesting, right? Because
I got a general question.
yeah, let me get to this part of it first, though. So it isn't necessarily that they're just, stacking up a 30 to 40 man fleet that's like inefficient and running around with that, but they're actually running multiple fleets at the same time, and then when a fight is going to break out, they basically just merge all of those fleets into one area, because there are 3 of these observatory flashpoints at any given time, or there were until the most recent change. And so they could have multiple fleets out running sites in congruency. That's not the right word. It's okay. It's not like English is my first language or anything. But yeah, like they would have fleets running at the same time, and then they would just merge when a fight would occur.
Yeah, not only we're gonna merge when the fight will occur, right? But obviously, if the sites spawn like in Navula, right? Like speaking like from the past, right? If when I was like in a Goon Praxis fleet, right? If sites spawned in Navula, it's basically if you go there, you die, right? Same thing here, right? Everyone kind of have their own like zones of control, right? Now, Frat was mostly in Navula, so in like Chinese time zone, you can't even go there, right? Because you're just gonna get blocked by 100 people. Same gonna happen in Virashoda, and same like 3 or 4 months ago what's happened in Skarkon. So we're not only gonna merge for the fight, but if sites spawn in Vira, we're gonna drop everything and gate this enormous blob to Vira just to get the site, right? Same with Skarkon, we're gonna gate both fleets there in case something undocks, right? Because if we only merge for the fight, right, you could just like, so for example, you can split fleets using bubbles on gates, right? Slow down one and don't slow down another one, and then just filament on top of the one that's now far away from the support one, right? And just heal them easily. But now we're gonna move together depending on the sites are, because after getting done a couple of times like that, people usually learn what to do. I think the most impactful thing of this payout, which makes it completely annoying, like it doesn't annoy you if you run like with your friends a couple of times a week, right? But if you run with a lot of people every single day, so and the fleet gonna have more than 15 usually, so like for example 20, right? And some people needs to drop, which basically messes up the watch list. It messes up the FC needs to do it, obviously. So you drop fleet, so everyone gets the money. And what we do as a group, right? We kind of spread the payment around, uh, depending on how many people are in the fleet, right? So for example, max payout is 15, 5 people dropped. So it's we call it a beaving. And there is like a formula that you calculate, and people send some money to FC, and then FC send the equal payment to these 5 people, right? So this way everyone got the same amount, but obviously like it's far from being fun, right?
Yeah, I actually only rarely have that problem because the way that I manage my fleets is generally after every completed site, we send a little bit of money to a wallet that I use for SRP if someone dies, or if we feed the whole fleet, whatever. And most of the time, we only have like 16 people, sometimes maybe 17 or something. So I'm usually able to pay it out of that wallet. And if I'm not, then we just do it the same way with the formula that everyone sends some money to them, and the payouts are all equal amongst the members.
Yeah, I also like forgot to mention that like obviously when you like when the fleet consists of your friends, right? Your friends gonna bring your best every time. Your best every time. We're gonna bring support and everything. But if it's a big group and like there is people coming in and out, uh, people gonna like be lazy and not bring support. So what we have to do most of the time is pay out like a dictors and bushers too. So like if you have a dictor or a busher, you can like X up for an extra payment. And some obviously it's like capped. You can't have like 3 main fleet and 1 dictor or 1 busher, right? But everyone should have 1 support if we want a second payment, which is like kind of annoying, but at least people bring it.
What was your question, Alec?
Just a question on the meta comps. So obviously, Pochven is mostly known for being the Triglavian region, but it doesn't sound like Triglavian ships are actually heavily used.
Yeah, I mean the paladin is just busted.
Yeah. So I was wondering, like, was that experimented with? At what point did you guys lose the role-playing flavor and we're just like, nah?
So I think it started from a dark side fleet. I don't actually remember who was first, like dark side or Volta. So basically CCP, CCP released the damage drag, but gives like I think 16% damage to a paladin. So basically you take this one and the guns do like 4. Like it stacks on top of pyro. So you do like 4k DPS with like just like hitting and shit, right? So people would bring like a couple of paladins, 1 or 2, and like most of the time only 2 groups were fighting. It was like dark side and Volta, and we added like it's funny how like it slowly started like people bring 2 paladins, then 3 paladins and 4 paladins, and then like entire blob of paladins.
Yeah.
And then CCP did this change that like made the Marauder like completely busted, right?
Yeah, I think I can't remember how exactly the order of changes was. I think we started, like, do you remember when they decreased the bastion time to 30 seconds?
They
I
did
remember
all the
them.
changes at once, if I recall, in terms of
Oh, they
the
did all at
damage,
once.
Mhm.
bastion time, and think that
Yeah.
the only thing that was separate was the plate change.
Because
the plate change was battleship buff, right?
Yeah, that was more recently though. I'm just trying to remember. I know that at the very start we had an active tanked Marauder with us actually, because it was easily able to tank the sides and do significantly more damage to the dreadnoughts than even the Leshaks were, and that was before the Bastion changes. And I believe we even had one buffer Marauder in the fleet even before the Bastion changes to just see if we can make use of the increased damage and like high alpha basically, and also to be able to project to a longer range.
Oh yeah, because the Russians love to bring like the Lachesis and
Yeah. And I mean, not only the Lachesis, but the long range Scorpions, the absolute cancer ones, those were a very big issue as well.
yeah. So I think it's actually you two are some of the best people. I mean, the only other person I can think of in terms of like who's fought as much as you guys did in like pure heavy armor
Lucky,
fights is
obviously,
probably like
someone to
Lockley,
mention.
but
Yeah.
you guys both have done a ton of fighting in specifically these heavy armor doctrines, and you've seen, you know, tons of tiny iterations and whatnot. So going off that Leshak question, right? Let's talk a little bit about first the start, kind of where we started with like Leshaks and Nestors, right? And then a little bit of the evolution from there. So I don't know, Wong, like in terms of like the early Leshak Nestor, what do you think was like, particularly with Nestors? Because Nestors are a ship you don't see almost anywhere else in Eve. How do you think the Nestor came to be such an important part of that early setup?
Oh man. Obviously, I'm a bit biased. It's like my favorite ship. Like the Nestor itself is completely broken for like Pochven and stuff. Because like maybe the day when CCP released the version of Nestor for Shield, right? It's gonna be a good day for Eve. But like the ship is basically insane, right? So since you can refit from it too, so you can the most fights. So basically, when we just started, right? Like for example, in Praxis, we usually get dunked by a road Leshak fleet or by a Volta Leshak fleet, right? And the Praxis doesn't do much against the Shack unless it's like increased amount of Praxises on the DPS pylon. You can nuke one or two as we burning in, but once way in, you dead, right? And like the main thing that was kind of like not even the comp having like better reps, better damage, but the refit ability, right? Because you can refit like even in warp. I don't know why refitting in warp is the thing, but you can refit before like landing. So you just align and then spec tank whatever you're gonna fight, right? If it's not even numbers, right? Usually like spec tanking is pretty toxic if you like fly in, if you fight in even numbers, but if you're outnumbered, you just spec tank and the fleet does way less damage. That's why like Nestor is so important. Obviously, like an amount of reps too. And like before, I think the first iteration was like Nestor's with a cap chain, which is obviously shit because this cap transfer doesn't do anything. Like it gives like 150 out, and then you spend something. So you generate something like about 50 cap, which does nothing. But people like scream in the middle of the fight that cap chain is down. It's very annoying. But Nestor is a crucial part of the fleet, and obviously the Shack reps. So the Shack fleet strong only if people in fleet who fly in the Shack are using reps, because most of the time, most EVA are gonna go on the Nestors, right? Because there was like some fights with Jaeger where he will bring like a pretty toxic setup with like 3 Lachesis, right? And Lachesis is just gonna spread dumps on the Nestor, and Nestor kind of out, right? And if your Shack's not ready to rep the damage, it's over, right?
So I think there's two things that I'm really interested in from that, right? One is, I think it's really funny that you are so against the cap transfers, because I know we stuck with them and wrote for a long time, where the Nester has a very unique place where it can use the cap transfers for like casual cap maintenance, right? You can keep your reps running in the site, you can keep your reps running in like low stress fight situations, but it also has the ability to slap in not just like one, but several heavy cap boosters if it wants to. And so, unlike a Guardian, or not a Guardian, but like a Legion or a Loki or an Aniros, where if you want to avoid cap chain for reasons of lock targets or just to avoid that mess, if you get neuted in a Loki, you're done. But if you get neuted in Nester, it's very hard to fully cap you out.
Yeah, that's why you bring the most important ship in the
Cap
fleet.
transfer
Right?
Guardian.
Yes.
Um,
If you undock without this thing, it's just bad.
I wanted to mention something as well. I generally think that cap transfer nesters are okay. However, outside of Pochven, because the issue with cap transfers in Pochven is if you have a nester that is very self-sustainable with cap booster, cap batteries, and just very strong resistance overall to cap warfare or energy warfare, it's a wasted locked target that will very likely, I mean, that might very likely get your fleet killed, and it's I think it's too, how do you say it? It's not worth the effort of actually capping
Yeah.
someone.
If
Whereas you could
if
have,
they break, if they
yeah,
break the chain, it does so much more damage, right? Because you
yeah,
just losing cap straight away.
yeah, I agree. And it's also a rep that you're losing after all. And the Nestor having an incredibly strong rep power, and assuming or taking, for example, you fighting against some cancer comp with 10 scorpions, and you manage to lock the target that you're repping, and you manage to get one rep cycle off. It's better to get that off on all 7 of your
Yeah.
reps, obviously, than when you only have 6 or even less than that.
Makes sense. I think the other piece that's very interesting is the Leshak's ability to have reps, right? That was something that, talking with people in the last episode about Leshaks and wormholes, they generally didn't do. They were focused on using those accounts as either a multi-box, so they didn't want to have too much attention being paid to them, or they were worried about like cap warfare and other things. So the Leshaks almost always had like Newts or Nosferatu or something else in highs. But here you're talking about having reps on the Leshaks as well as the Nesters. So, I mean, you talked a little bit about it, but we'll switch to NoPro. Like, if you have reps on the Leshaks, how are you looking to use them? And how does that change how the Leshak needs to fly?
I mean, something you always need to consider is that while the Leshak does get, I think, an activation cost reduction for the remote reps, it is still a large amount of cap that you lose essentially. And considering that at the start we didn't really run with any haulers or something in our fleet, and also only had limited Guardian numbers, we were like one of the most important things was making sure that you don't run out of cap before the enemy fleet does. So while the Leshak reps are very effective in supporting nesters, for example, you could easily run a setup with only one nester, and when that nester gets primaried, everyone knows that they have to rep it, and otherwise the nester is able to just rep the fleet. You still need to pay a lot of attention to your own cap and not overuse the reps. So yeah, another thing why the Leshaks were my personal go-to was because I very much tried to pay attention to the 15-man limit. On the one hand, so that everyone could get a payout. On the other hand, so that we have everyone in, like, all the ships placed by or flown by a main, so that the maximum amount of attention can be paid to it, and so that we wouldn't have to have, I don't know, a dual boxed Leshak, which isn't as bad, but for example, a dual boxed Guardian is something, especially in the setup with less targets that we talked about earlier, very diminishing for your fleet overall. So yeah, that's why the reps need to be used with caution. Let's just say.
So the shacks obviously had some, cool advantages. Nesters had their cool things, but then you mentioned even like before the changes, there were initial hints of how Marauders could be used effectively. But
yeah, killing the
for yeah, we'll talk
that-
more about the
is that-
change after, right? And so you mentioned Bastion time was reduced to 30 seconds, and then obviously the damage itself is more explanatory in terms of like, oh wow, they do 2 times as much damage. They do more damage than everything else in the game now, right? So that part's a little self-explanatory. Let's talk a little bit about like the Bastion time, the change with plates, and how those made it so that Marauders really were kind of uncontested as like the apex ship, particularly in armor, but even like overall.
I mean, the main difference between the Leshak Brawl and the Paladin Brawl, right? Like, it's a instant damage and a spooling damage, right? So, like, the Leshak Brawl, like the uh, the best fights I had, it was basically a Leshak Brawl with maybe 1 or 2 Paladins, right? Because it can go like for an hour, right? Until one side run out of the cap boosters. Because there is no instantly breaking ships, right? Now it's kind of you land on grid and usually like there is 9 or 10 paladins, right? You either tank it or you not, and instantly one ship, like basically you switch targets until one ship dies, and that's it, right? But with a Leshak Brawl, right, there is like a lot of space to do the plays kind of thing. Or a Filament cap track when enemy doesn't, right? Then it's over.
Yeah. Something that you mentioned with the Bastion change and plate change, while before those changes they were very rarely used as like kind of a long range, almost support role to clear like I don't know, any E-war that is very far away. Especially the Bastion change allowed the Marauders to be viable in, or like as a main DPS ship, because the Bastion itself gives them higher resistances, meaning that they have ridiculous local tanks, or not local tanks, but ridiculous buffer tanks, that mean that they can survive their 30-second Bastion timer, and then receive reps afterwards. Obviously, the increased damage on Marauders and whatever other broken stats they got were very useful to the whole thing as well. But that was the main selling point as to why Marauders became so popular, because why use a Leshak? Why use a Leshak that you need to wait a minute before you're at 2k DPS if you can just bring a Marauder and instantly shit out 20,000 DPS from the get-go with only 10 paladins or whatever.
Yeah, the only thing, like for example, Frat never get, because at the end they started running the Paladin fleet, which consisted with just 11 Paladins, right? And you know what happened if you bring only Paladins, right? You just put EM on thermal and it's over. So the fleet should have a different type of damage, even if it's like full, for example, like 7 Paladins. But if you bring like Kronos or like 2 more shacks, it's much better than just 2 or 3 more Paladins.
Alright, so there's one weakness I can exploit if my opponent is very dumb. Perfect.
Yeah, so Horde did it without like realizing it, Frat did it without realizing it, so you just spec tank, and I mean, you can spec tank
I
with,
laugh at them.
yeah, and they don't understand what the fuck is happening, because like if you look for your devs and like for Frat devs and Horde devs, if you look at the cargo, right, there is fucking nothing. There is fuck all there. So they never refit, they never put a thought into it, right? when you refit stuff. Like maybe like we refit a scrum for a warp disruptor, right? Or maybe a jam like Frat does, like Frat. And then Frat started refitting like missile guidance disruptor against proxy fleet, right? To counter Bargus blob, which is like, but yeah, the comp needs to be like, you need to put thought into the comp or it's not gonna work. You're gonna like deal the same damage type. That's why, for example, like if you know like the Pochven, like multi-boxer method, right? There was a time where like people were running 30 Vargurs, right? Which is way more scary when we started running 30 Paladins, right? Because Vargur does completely different damage, while the Paladin does only the same one, right? EM or Turbo, right? So you just spec tank and it's nothing.
It's funny that you brought up the missile guidance disruptors, because when I was talking to Proxy, he actually brought that up as one of the funniest fights he's been in, because they all brought the guidance disruptors, but almost all of them put the guidance disruptors on him. So most of the fleet could shoot fine, and Proxy had a range of like 12 kilometers.
Yeah, that's a classic. Yeah. Guys scrum something, and they scrum only person they know, and that's it. Or like a most expensive ship, like an Nestor or a Paladin, and then everything is warps off, right?
Oh, you got to home in on the dollar signs.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is unique to Pochven, even compared to Wormhole Space, is the functional lack of capitals. Obviously, there are capitals in Pochven that are legacy from the systems that were moved in, but you're never going to see someone take one of these out just for a fight over an Observatory Flashpoint. So, how much do you think the lack of capital ships improves it? And like, what kind of things do you think the lack of capital ships makes possible that you just can't do anywhere else?
Yeah, you can use Marauders, right? Because try to use Marauders in low sec, right? But here you can like use blingy battleships, and once you bring like a 30 ships or like 20, 30 ships, right? A strong comp to like fight the blob, right? We need to put a lot of effort to kill you, right? It's not gonna be just like random dread warping in with a windy, right? And you die. But we need to put a lot of effort to kill it. That's why it's like so cool, because you can actually spend money on the setup without it dying immediately, right? Because people need to bring their best to kill you, right? Without a cap kind of thing. Or a blob.
I think the biggest thing to me is the change in how logistics are thought about, right? Which, even in like the Wormhole high class brawls I was talking to them about, the Force Auxiliary, right, is such an important tool, because the Force Auxiliary is worth, 10 to 15 Guardians, depending on how they're fit. It's worth 4 to 5 Nesters, depending on how those Nesters are fit. And so, when you're looking at what you should bring in terms of like pilot numbers, in terms of like most effective rep power that can't be killed, the facts would always win. And without facts in the equation, suddenly that opens up so much more space for different, unusual things, right? Like the Nesters that you don't see anywhere else. Things like Nesters with Cap Guardians, things like Logi T3Cs that you just don't really see in other areas of space that suddenly become a lot more viable. Actually, one ship that I'd almost forgotten about, I didn't put on here, in terms of very unusual support ships. NoPro, I believe on occasion, you have been known to bring a particularly very large, unusual support ship.
A Vito.
Oh no,
Orca.
he means
Yeah.
yeah.
A little bit about how that happened.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. It mainly started out as a meme, because even at the start, I'm a very impatient person, I would say, or not really impatient, but I can't stand staleness of a meta, let's say. So I was bored of just flying Leshaks all the time. So I decided to mix it up a little bit and do some shield stuff, which led me to probably one of my favorite ships, the Rattlesnakes. And I ended up doing that as a Doctrine, which worked really well, and we had a lot of fun with it. Unfortunately, we didn't really get many use cases for it. But at that point, we already had known the magic that DST with cap boosters can bring to a fleet. And I was looking at the shield DSTs, and they were, for my taste, way too shit. Let's just say. They had low tank. You were able to nude out most of the active hardeners if you fit them. If you fit it passive, you were lacking a decent amount of tank. They were warping slow. They were lining slow. So I wasn't really happy with it overall. And so I was looking at something else. And what came to mind was the Orca, which had enough tank in any scenario, be it shield or hull. With snakes, it actually went faster than the rattlesnakes. And the warp speed you could easily adjust by putting on some warp speed rigs. So I just went with that. And I've had a lot of fun with it. And I think it worked out pretty well. The only slight change that you need to pay attention to is that it cannot get boosted. So if you get bubbled outside on the flashpoint and the Orca gets bubbled, you're in a bit of trouble. So I usually try to get that in before everything else. But luckily, I've not had any issue with that so far. And if I decide to bring it out again, I hope I won't have any issues with that either.
So, as somebody who has been in Pochven a while, I don't have the best read on whether we've missed things in this conversation. But Alec, is there anything else in terms of the site itself, or kind of these high-level battles that you're really interested in pulling from our brains?
Is there a role for shield ships in this? Do you guys see that as a possibility, or is the Nestor just so overwhelmingly dominant as far as determining fights that there's just no point to doing shield?
I mean, as I said, me disliking the stale meta of how things currently are with everyone just spamming paladins, I very much tried to look for an alternative. But considering that there's no shield Nestor or anything that even comes close to it, and the shield doctrines generally being much more vulnerable to any kind of e-war, be it newts against the hardeners, smart bombs against the mainly used missiles, or anything else really. I don't think that in the current meta there's any place for a shield doctrine on the battleship or marauder level as there is with paladins and leshaks and Nestors.
So the one exception to that that I think is a big standout is, unfortunately, while the shield logistics can't tank by being close, they don't have the HP, they're vulnerable to newts, they can tank by running away. And so I talked a fair bit about these with Proxay, because obviously he's a big enjoyer, but the Barghest fleet as a doctrine is something that is very effective in Pochven, in large part because of its mobility, right? It's using logistics Lokis usually. Frat will sometimes use a Horde, one of the two. Will sometimes use Scimitars, but don't do that. That's cringe.
Yeah.
Just buy the Lokis, you'll be fine. But the Barghest, with Rapid Heavies in particular, is a doctrine that can project out to 100, 120 kilometers. And so its methodology of dealing with paladins is it just stays out of range of those pulse guns, because it can, and they might still be able to get hit, but it's in deep fall off, so you're fine. And so it can try and take apart a heavy armor fleet at range, but even if it can't, it can always just leave. And there's really nothing that the heavy armor fleet can do about it.
Yeah, so
While so good.
so there is like for example, if you take proxy, for example, there is like a certain amount of paladins and certain amount of bargains needs to be on other side, on like each side for fight to be like good, right? Because so basically you need to make sure that Bargist can break a paladin immediately, and the paladins can break a Bargist or Loki immediately, and then kind of everyone exploit the fleet weaknesses, right? Like Bargist can exploit the slow reps on support. For example, if you try to bush and then you try to volley a hick while he is pointing, right, before he gets reps, and then the fight kind of funny, right? When the fight is fun, but what the Frat did at the end, right? It would be a 15 like to 16 Bargis blob with 8 Lokis, and this is just not fun, right? Because every support gonna die, and every fight basically goes, they just orbit you until you make a mistake and something dies, right? But
Yeah,
this
I
is
mean, that's just the general issue with blocks, I would say. I don't think there's much
yeah,
too much you can do about it.
Well,
But
there
I
was
mean,
one thing that I will say prevented blocks very effectively that got changed, which was the gate standings. So for folks who don't know, most of the gate, or all of the gates in Pochven essentially, used to have a minimum Triglavian standing to get through them at all. Some of them would have a 1.0, some would have a 3.0, and some would have a 7.0. And so, depending on your Triglavian standings, we were very limited in how you could move around Pochven. Eventually, this was mostly removed. The only exception is the home systems on the corners, where you still need a 7.0 standing with Triglavians in order to get in. But outside of that, you can now move in a full loop around the triangle. And so that had a very drastic change in terms of blocks. And I mean, you guys can talk about it more if you want, but yeah, it was something that was very frustrating to me at the time. Although I understand why they did it.
I wasn't here like when the gate got changed, but like if I think about it, I think it's just protects the crab even more, because obviously people who crabbed a lot in Pochven, they just gonna be safe behind the gate, right?
I
So
mean,
like not only go
on the one hand, I agree because it massively favored the crabs, seeing as how people lived there for months, even basically just being able to crab and no one even being there to contest them, and that being the reason why CCP opened the gates in the first place. But I think there you see another quote unquote CCP issue, where it's either they have the gate standings or they could remove them completely, as opposed to I don't know, making 2 3 or like 3 probably systems that don't have any standings at all, where you can farm them, and then I don't know, have 0.5 and like 1.0 standing requirements for other systems. That would make the bar of the entry bar slightly higher than just 0.01 positive Triglavian standings, um, which you can easily farm by killing one drone, and basically allowed everyone to get in without any effort at all.
yeah.
And since I mean I didn't benefit a lot from the standings from the standing requirements before the change. So it's not like I'm mad because I would have been able to crab a lot. It's just I as with many things in Eve, the blocks are just an issue that the smaller guys are mostly unable to take on their own. So they'll have to bring friends, which leads to the enemy also bringing friends, which leads to 1,000 people in system, and the road fault in Larvola dying or something like that.
I might still be slightly annoyed about that. Not gonna lie. It's a little annoying to see your Citadel in Pochven get attacked by 1,500 characters that don't do anything in Pochven. But
Yeah.
it is what it is. So, one of the last things I want to do then, before we start to wrap up, is I like to grab a particular standout fight that you guys might remember from whenever in your time fighting over these flashpoints that was really a standout for you.
Is it one? I have three.
They're all fun.
Well, I think like at least one of them like yeah, I think one of them is. Where did I link? Do I link it in general here or somewhere
You
else?
can link it wherever. But yeah, just talk us through it.
I mean, need to like people open the BR, I guess.
It'll be in the video. Just talk us through it.
So I linked it in the main channel. So this one like the most memorable for me because it was the time where like Horde started doing this more and Naga blob shit, and like it's not big problem when you have like a stacked fleet, but if you undock with like less people, when like 15 or 16 or whatever 20, the Naga blob will just outrun you, right? So there was a point where we stopped undocking like expensive shit because they just ping on everything, right? They just see us, instant main fleet ping, they filament in, and you can't do anything, right? So we started killing our expensive shit, and it was a time also when CCP released this damage bonus drag. So we switched for Abaddon for a while. It was like 2k damage Abaddon, which was pretty fun meta. We like run two sides and then go die to someone, right? Running like Shack fleet or a Paladin fleet, which was pretty fun. And this was the day when like we toned the Naga blob a bit down, and we decided, okay, we're gonna go like with our like a best shot. We weren't like giga rich at the time, but like we're gonna go like with stacked fleet with pods and everything, and we go to Raravos OF, and then suddenly Mr. Sailor comes into system, right, with a snuffed shack fleet, and he uses like OP strategy. He says like, "Come to the gate, pussy," right? And you kind of can do nothing about it. And we decided, okay, like if we undocked like this, like what's the better fight would be is if it's not a snuffed out, right? So we warped the gate, and it was like an hour brawl, which basically it was like a learning experience for me because I didn't even play the game for that long. It was like maybe 4 or 5 months for me, and like people. So first thing, we had a smaller fleet at the start, and we kind of like, okay, yeah, you can win this one, right? You can win this one. Just come in, right? And then slowly ships started piling in, right? So slowly, two paladins appeared, two scorpions appeared, then a cap track appeared, right? And the fight kind of already started. But this is standout for me because it went for a while, and we lost to, obviously we lost it, but we lost it to capping out. But the amount of experience was gained from this one, like pretty insane for the people who were in the fleet, because we all basically were learning. And saying like sailors, saying GF, I hope everyone had a good time, was pretty big one. So this one is my favorite for sure.
I will shout out you guys too. I don't think you're gonna do it yourself, but Strap Out Clade, the group you fly with, right? When you guys started, definitely not up there in terms of like pilot skill, in terms of experience. You guys would go out, take fights, and it was rough. But you guys were the most consistent in terms of going out and continuing to take fights, and you learned and learned and learned. And like now, if you ask most people who's like the most experienced, competent, like dangerous heavy armor fleet in Pochven, the answer is gonna be you guys. And that's because you guys worked on it, right? which to me is just so impressive.
Yeah, I think like the peak of like Strybog was a bit earlier because before like the goons decided to deploy, when it was like an actual small group, when everyone know each other. When basically this fight happened, it's kind of started, and then maybe 6 months after that, what was like a pure like a blast basically. But obviously after goons deployed, it became just less pilot skills, but just more people, right? So I think peak was kind of past, but I agree. Like the when I joined, the main doctrine was like a typhoon, obviously. But then like one person came to the alliance. It was Hilneros, and he kind of changed everything because he played the game for a bit, and he showed the shacks and nesters and basically taught everyone how to fly them. So it was like a biggest change.
What about you, NoPro?
I've actually just taken a minute to look for some for the proper BRs, and I've also had the two favorite fights. The first one especially being more exciting, probably because it was I think I don't know, at least 15 or so minutes of us just going at it for a while. It was when I first started, and one of our first fleets as well. And we had Vindicators as our main DPS ship, and we were fighting against Lockley, and we were doing really well. We had in the video from Eddie, you can see a nice comparison between our two comps. We almost had even damage, even rep power, and so on. And yeah, it was just an overall great fight, and they won by jamming our Nestor for 2 cycles back to back, with the jammer burning out on the last cycle, just as the Nestor died, as you can see in the thumbnail as well. It was incredibly close, and it was probably one of the most fun fights I've had um, in a long while at that point. And the second one is the not as exciting. It was also against Lockley. Just don't mind the third side on the left there. There were some randoms that died in the flashpoint, but it was my signature Orca with Widow that I had just
Yeah.
gotten as a gift about 3 or 4 days prior, and another person that was flying with me in Pochven regularly said, "Please don't feed it yet. I want to see it on grid at some point." And of course, I fed it the next day without him being on grid, and I'm still very sorry for that. He hasn't played Eve since, so I don't know. Maybe it's my fault, but who knows? And no, actually, it's not that bad. But still, it was an incredibly fun fight as well. It could have been a lot better had I not um, fucked up so bad, because I was at 0 with my Widow, which is generally not a good idea. Uh, and I died, which led to most of us dying and the rest just getting out. But I still had a lot of fun there, so I think it's a worthy second place.
Yeah, I watched this one from like on grid cloaked. It's pretty cool. Like to understand what Orca gonna do, because initially I thought it's gonna be a rep Orca because it has like a shit bonus to rep range,
Yeah,
right? But it was a new Orca, right, with some refits. That's pretty
it
cool.
was actually only to refit and for cap boosters. It didn't have any other purpose.
I'm gonna link one too. So this one is like it's kind of a local one because like obviously if you recognize people on the BR, it's gonna be like a input broadcasting guy, Ilando, and obviously it's a miracle, a Vargur guy. So what we usually do, we would team up together and we just run sites like this, right? So obviously it's not tankable usually, like it's not fightable with a normal necessarily Shackcom, right? So what uh, we decided to do instead, since we all buffer feed, we decided since we all self-rep feed, we're gonna all feed buffer and we're just gonna land on grid and just trade. So we're gonna trade like one paladin for 2 warriors, right? And doesn't matter we lose some, but in the end we should came out on top, and it was like one of the best thing because like there is like 5 people here, so Squatty, Madness, Tatashila, Yell, me, and Fleb, and we needed to like alarm clock in Jetta, grab this all these ships because obviously these people are Russians, so most people needed to alarm clock it into this time zone, and we filamented this fleet on so they can see it, and as you can see, we did the dishonorable strat of refitting everything to a shed fit just to try to fight. So usually the Vargor will cost like 3.6 bill, but now it's gonna just basically just refitted shit fit to try a fight instead, which is like the only thing I'm sad about, but the fight itself was pretty cool. Yeah, it's basically state of Pochven.
So, speaking
But the guy
of
got
the state of
banned,
Pochven, there's one last question I have for you, Wong, and that is, if you want to look into the crystal ball a bit, how do you think the change to the spawn timers of the flashpoints is going to impact Pochven?
I'm assuming we're gonna revert it or like make it better or just.
What do you think the state of Pochven will be with the timer at 90 minutes?
So basically, every organized content with a group is gone, right? It's just entirely gone. The best you can do is just camp in your staging system, having permanent eyes and like 2 or 3 jumps out, and once you have spawn, you undock and run it. That's like the best content you can do as a group with that change, because it's pretty brutal. It benefits only people like obviously I run a multi-box fleet with Yell, so it benefits me too, but it benefits the multi-boxing gameplay where you just don't care about pinging the fleet, right? You just do something else. You see the side spawn, you go run it, right? And the most damage this change does is to fleets that gonna come and kill me, right? Because, for example, you can delay the timers, right? And only you gonna know the timer. You can delay it like that, so you can run one side, extract, run an hour, extract, run an hour, right? Just filamenting in every time, because people who gonna come kill you, they're not gonna know the timers immediately, right? So when it was already pretty hard for the fleet coming to kill you, to get you before you get into a second room, right? And once you get into a second room, it's pretty hard to them to contest if you have a good fleet. But now it's just not worth the time, right? Like as Proxy already said, and it's like the reason why he don't want to play this CCP game anymore, right? It's just normal people would not have time to do anything, right? It's just gonna be run by multi-boxers with a good intel and till the end of times. That's it. Normal people just gonna leave.
They're not here, but I can tell you that Proxy and Fast Rage had very, very similar answers. It seems like people are pretty much in agreement in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, just like the whole thing where you ping a fleet and run for a few hours is gone, right? And it was the most fun, right? Because like the people we expect in the fleet. I remember I come back home, I ping a fleet, my friends join, and we go run sites for 3 hours. If we get a fight, we get a fight. If we don't, we don't, right? Same with like a NoPro fleet, right? They gonna make a fleet, right? Filament in, kill something, and so on, right? But now what you need to do is you need to go scout. So most of the time you're not gonna find OF at all, right? So you're gonna filament in, you're gonna do a circle, and you're not gonna find any OFs because they already scooped. They gone. Like you not. So what you gonna do next, right? You need to find at least one, right? And how you gonna find one? So if you manage to find one, right, you need to have a fleet ready to to kill people on it, right? And like it's so much like advantage of the people who live inside and disadvantage from people for people who lives outside. It's like it's just enormous now. It's not gonna work. Like I don't know why they did this change. Like you could just like harden the payout, right? And just maybe distribute it between other sites in Pochven, like do whatever. But when like in Eve, the best thing to do is undock, right? But this change makes you to dock up for 90 minutes, right? So now meta is like you have friends, they run sites, when send you a timer, right? And if the timer's too close, you wait a bit before running the sites, you run it, and then you have better control over these timers, right? It's pretty toxic right now. Like, and I don't know why they did this particular way, right? Because there is anything better than this.
Anything better? that's
Yeah.
that's how I feel about a lot of CCP changes. To be honest, I'm not gonna lie. Surgical Strike was a real
It
good
makes-
one too.
It makes me like pretty sad because like I spend a lot of time like building a group that can undock like without me or without like a core people, but can like undock, go run some sites, maybe take some fights or like die, right? And now basically this entire part of the gameplay is gone, right? The best they can do is sit in station, run 2-3 close sites before like the guy multi-boxing 5-fish starts gonna scoop it, right? Because he had intel and you didn't, right? Or like he had a timer and you didn't, right? Because with the timer, you don't even know when to start scouting, right? So for example, imagine this, right? Imagine you don't have eyes everywhere, right? Or like people who gonna tell you where the sites are, right? You need to filament in. Do a circle, not find any sites, and do a circle again until you find the sites. And then only then you're gonna get a respawn. And then you do a circle, like this site probably gonna get run because you're not gonna be ready for this. But then you have a timer to do another circle, right? But by the time you finish the circle, the site probably already scooped. Like,
Yeah, it's rough for sure.
it's so bad.
All right. Well, hopefully CCP has a chance to revisit that, and I imagine that if the data on the MER in January and February is as bad as people think it will be, then there'll be some significant pushing to change that. But thank you both so much for coming on. Been at this for pretty much an hour at this point here. And so I'm gonna take answers from Proxy and Fast Rage. We'll get them all together and try and get all that information organized for listeners. But thank you everyone for listening. This has been the second episode of Deeper Dive, and we will see you on the next one.